Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Corinthians. Today we begin looking at chapter 12. Now in this chapter, Paul is going to say, I'm going to continue my boasting, though there's nothing really to gain from this. Remember in chapter 11, he called it the foolishness of boasting. He's boasting about who he is in the Lord and the ministry that Christ has given him. And he's doing this because of these false apostles. These false apostles who have arrived in Corinth and are attempting to lead the church astray. And so Paul is forced to boast about his own life in Christ that he might hold them true to the gospel. Now in chapter 12, he began to boast about some visions and revelations he has had in the Lord. It's quite a remarkable story he's about to tell. So let's begin reading 2 Corinthians chapter 12. I must go on boasting, although there's nothing to be gained. I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. So he's talking about some visions he had, some revelations. Now we know of some of the visions Paul had. We remember especially well when he was on his second missionary journey. And he was in the city of Troas, wondering where to go next. And he had a vision of a man of Macedonia saying, come over here and help us. And he knew that vision was a direction and guidance from the Lord to go to Macedonia, northern Greece, and continue his ministry there. So Paul has had these kind of visions throughout his life, but now he's going to talk about some he's never discussed before, some extraordinary visions and revelations. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was called up to the third heaven. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, he was caught up to paradise. And he heard inexpressible things, things no one is permitted to tell. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weaknesses. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep myself from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So Paul begins to talk about these visions and revelations. Now it's interesting, he first begins to talk about himself in the third person. I know a man who was caught up into heaven 14 years ago. Whether he's in the body or not, I don't know. I know that this man was caught up and saw things and heard things he's not permitted to tell. He said, well, he's talking to the third person. How do you know he's referring to himself? Well, he had talked about the visions, revelations he had received from the Lord. And he goes on to say, talk about these surpassing great revelations he had received, so that as a result, he received this thorn to keep him from becoming proud. So it's clear that he's talking about himself. And I suspect, we're just guessing here, but I suspect that the visionary experience was so extraordinary, he talked about himself in the third person to in some ways back off from seeming to boast about it. But it's clear he is referring to himself. Now notice he says it happened 14 years ago. This vision I received, this extraordinary experience, occurred 14 years ago. Now we know that the letter of 2 Corinthians was written around 56 or 57 AD. So 14 years back would put us about 42 or 43 AD, which would be about 10 years after Paul's conversion, because he was converted about the year AD 33 AD. And if we look at the timeline of Paul, this is before he began any of his great missionary journeys, and he was probably in either the city of Tarsus at this time. You remember after his conversion, he first went back to Jerusalem. They sent him back to Tarsus for a time. And then after that, Barnabas took him to minister in the city of Antioch. So he's either in Tarsus toward the end of his time there, or he's with Barnabas in the city of Antioch, where he led the church there. So this is during a sort of a quiet time in the life of Paul, either in Tarsus, which years are basically silent for us, or in Antioch, while he's leading the church there before the great missionary journeys begin. But he had these extraordinary experiences, these visionary experiences, and Christ showed him some things that he said, I'm not allowed to tell. They were so extraordinary that though he talks about the experience he had, he can't really say what he heard or what he saw. You say, well, why would you receive a vision that you can't talk about? When he received the vision of the man of Macedonia, he could talk about that. But I think this was for Paul's own spiritual benefit, and it grew him in who he was in the Lord, but it was not something that could be shared in a wider sense. That's about all we can say about it. So all we know is that while he was in Tarsus, or perhaps in Antioch, he had these extraordinary visions that he says confirmed who I am in Christ and the ministry. It prepared me in so many ways for the supernatural power of God that I would need in the ministry he was about to send me on. Now he talks about being called up into the third heaven. What does that mean? Well, we need to talk about that some, but we're going to do that in tomorrow's session. So we'll continue looking at this vision Paul had and what he meant by saying I was called up into the third heaven. So join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Corinthians.